That's pretty bitter. Whoo. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Wild Edibles Test Kitchen. I'm your host, Sergei, and this is the show where we harvest one wild edible and turn it into something delicious. That way you guys get to learn something, maybe learn a new culinary skill or recipe, and I get to walk my own walk and actually go foraging and feed my family. In today's episode, I'm going to teach you how to make prickly lettuce soup. I'm going to show you how to pick wild lettuce and turn it into a very delicious vegetable bacon soup. Doesn't matter what time of year it is, whether it's summertime or wintertime, if you make a really delicious soup, people will eat it. And today I'm going to show you how to do that on the cheap, because shit's getting crazy out there, man. Things are expensive, and I'm a little bit pissed today. Maybe we'll talk about that as we walk to the garden. Without further ado, here's prickly lettuce soup. It's going to get a little sharp, it's going to get spicy. Let's go. Here's a quick peek at our 2023 garden. Here at Butenko Farms, we don't just eat weeds and drink smoothies. We do sometimes grow cultivated vegetables. And this year, I did something a little crazy. I planted sunflowers all the way around the perimeter of the garden. Thousands of sunflowers, and then in the middle I have like squash. Kylie and I planted all kinds of different vegetables. I also want to show you one thing I'm doing over there real quick. This is going to be an edgy episode. I don't typically film when I'm in this state, but this seems to be a constant state lately, and if I keep waiting for the best mood ever, I'll get no work done. So my wife yesterday comes back from Costco and she's a little bit upset. I say, honey, what's wrong? Why are you upset? She goes, I just spent $400 at Costco, $377 at Costco, and here's a picture of what the shopping cart looked like. And she goes, how is it that it's 400 bucks to get this little food? Meanwhile, we're reading articles online that are like, inflation's never been lower since the start of the pandemic. Everything's getting better. How dumb do they think we are? Seriously, how dumb do they think we are? Gas is the most expensive it's been in a long time. Food costs are insane. At every stop, they're screwing us. And, you know, my wife and I make pretty good money, and yet we're struggling. And it's pretty damn bad. I mean, I don't think I'm making this stuff up. Literally, all of my friends are struggling right now for one reason or another economically. Literally all of my friends. I don't think it's deniable at this point. While moping this weekend, I also got off my butt and decided to do something about it. And so I plowed 4 rows, 4 long rows, and fixed irrigation to those rows so that I can plant some pumpkins and watermelons. It's a little late in the year, but I think because we live in Southern Oregon, zone 7, zone 8, I can squeeze in a crop of pumpkins and sell them in the front yard just in time for Halloween. Maybe, fingers crossed. I'm doing that to earn a little bit more cash because we got to do something. We can't sit idle. When we immigrated from Russia to the United States, there was a point where we were homeless and on the street, and my parents made 10 grand in a month selling watermelons in Denver. So like in the early 90s, they found this guy in Greeley, Colorado that would let them buy 1 watermelon for 10 cents, and then they would take it back to the big city, to Denver, and sell those watermelons on the street for $1 or $2. And they made really good money. I don't think I'm going to be that successful by any stretch of the imagination, but even if I make 500 or 1,000 bucks slinging pumpkins from the front yard, it's like that money doesn't fly out onto the sidewalk, you know what I mean? And this is one of the reasons I'm even making this show. This is one of my main motivations. I think it's awesome that you can offset hundreds, if not thousands of dollars of food by eating free weeds that are more nutritious than even the best store-bought organic foods. It's a pretty anarchist thing that plants have going for them. They're essentially like supplements. They're better than most supplements. And if you decide, you know, that you want to get a little crazy and eat some of those nature's gifts, you can reap the rewards and it doesn't cost you a penny. Yeah. So fight inflation, eat the weeds, and let's come harvest some wild lettuce with Sergei. This stuff was thriving in the last row of my garden, so I just let it grow, because why not? It's work that I didn't have to do and a crop I didn't have to pay for. And it looks like this stuff is a little bit past its prime because it's flowering, but that really doesn't matter because we're gonna just cook it down. We're gonna find the young growing bits and use those, and we're gonna cook them down in a soup. So as is tradition, let's come in for a close-up and quickly study this plant so we remember it for life. Then we'll harvest, clean, and go in the kitchen and cook. Like all good foragers, we first have to identify a plant before we eat it. We have to positively identify it so as not to eat something we're not supposed to eat. That's just kind of a generally good rule for life. Don't eat something if you don't know what it is. The best way to do that, in my experience, is to follow the guidance of my foraging teacher, Karen Sherwood, who says that you just need to sit down with the plant and describe it to yourself, and then you'll never forget it. You'll always know that this is wild lettuce. The very first thing that I see is that it kind of has a dandelion-like shape. You know, this could kind of look like a dandelion leaf, and that is because wild lettuce is in the sunflower family, the same family as dandelions. So it's a dandelion relative. And it also has very, very interesting veins. Look how cool those look. Almost like lizard skin, crocodile skin. Those are all really good identifying characteristics. If you look really closely at the main vein, it's got woody thorns on it. This is where prickly lettuce or wild lettuce gets its name. So why on earth would you want to eat this stuff? Well, first of all, why not? Trying something new is fun. And if it's a little bit, you know, fringy or different, well, that just makes it a better adventure. So that's number one. Number two, this is a very nutritious plant. Believe it or not, this wild lettuce is the origin of all lettuces. I like to say that it's 10,000-year-old lettuce. Before we had things like romaine lettuce or butterhead lettuce, this is kind of what grew naturally. And then over time, people cultivated modern cultivated lettuce from wild varieties. And so this is lettuce as nature intended. It's very rich in all kinds of vitamins and minerals. In fact, let's quickly run over some of the health benefits. This stuff is rich in A, B, and C vitamins, plus copper, phosphorus, potassium, iron, calcium, and magnesium. If your body is sore or if you just have some pain, it helps regulate pain. There's kind of some sedative qualities, which also makes it good for sleep. So a lot of people grind this up and make tincture, and they use it as a remedy against pain and better sleep. Look at that distinct white sap. I was recently watching a great video by the Feral Forager on YouTube. He's a really good channel that does lots of wild edible content, and he made a like a black tar tincture with wild lettuce syrup, which he used to aid in sleep, because this stuff, one of its health properties is it helps you sleep better. And like in the previous video I mentioned, I have insomnia. I don't sleep at night a lot of times, and I'm also trying to walk my own talk in that sector and actually eat foods that are supposed to be beneficial for that. This white sap, which is pretty bitter, helps make bile production happen, and it's just generally cleansing for your liver, your pancreas, your gallbladder. This is an incredibly nutritious and beneficial plant for diabetics or people with hypoglycemia, because it's going to help restore some of your pancreas function. One of the benefits of finding your wild lettuce when it's gone to flower is you get a different part of the plant to eat. The fruits and flowers of a plant are nature's gifts to you. They want you to eat these things because hopefully then you poop them out in a nice pile of fertilizer and plant more of these plants. So another identifying characteristic of this stuff is a flower that grows and resembles a dandelion. We've often talked on this channel in various episodes and videos about the importance of finding the tender growing parts, the meristems, and today is going to be no exception, because we're ultimately going to be eating the food, and so we don't really want the leaves that have the biggest thorns on them. Those are going to be pretty gnarly. Yes, they will cook down some, but we still want to avoid the woody thorns. So instead of picking the very fibrous parts, we're going to go for the tender bits, the meristematic parts, the growing parts of the plant. These parts generally grow at the tips of the plant, and they're generally a little lighter in hue. So whereas this stuff is kind of almost more of like a deep green bluish, the growing parts of wild lettuce is going to be light green in hue, and it's also going to break off easily, kind of like tender asparagus, if you will. Boom, just like that. So I'm going to set the camera down because this is much easier with two hands, but you get the picture. I'm going to just go through and harvest the tips of wild lettuce, just like that. And then I'm going to throw my harvest into the bowl. We're probably going to harvest half of that for our soup. We want a very green rich soup. We want a very healthy soup. And so we're just going to fill this bowl with a heaping amount of wild lettuce. And so I'm just going through and I'm picking the tips of this wild lettuce, the stuff that hasn't flowered, the stuff that has thorns that are very tender, and leaving the more fibrous stuff alone. And if for some reason you can't find tender young parts on this plant, I do want to illustrate that you can use the more mature leaves for this soup. It really doesn't make a difference. It's going to taste good either way when you season it correctly. And so you have options. The tender leaves are best, the tops are the best, but you can use the mature leaves as well. Just have at it. That stuff's pretty bitter right there. We're going to cook it down today with fat and all kinds of seasoning and kind of get rid of some of that bitter taste. But if you were to try this raw, I bet it'd be pretty bitter. That's pretty bitter. Woo! That's the real deal. This is not a beginner wild green. And it's raw form. It's like getting kicked in the face by a horse. The wild lettuce has been picked, so let's go wash up and transition into the kitchen. By now you know the drill. Wash your weeds, pick out anything that's not wild lettuce, the plant you're working with. Make sure it's intentional. Make sure all the bugs, all the muck is rinsed off. You have to do this fairly quickly with wild edibles because they're very perishable. We have our wild harvest, it's been rinsed. Now the only thing left is to get in the kitchen and make it into a delicious soup. But first, I'm going to put you through a little ad.
This video is sponsored by me and my books. I publish ebooks and books on different topics, and the money generated from these sales helps me fund new projects just like this one. If you like my content and want to help me create more of it, go buy my books. Print and digital titles now available on Amazon and at sergeibutenko.com.
There we go. I'll set it to high. Get that water boiling quick. While I'm here, I might as well run through the ingredients. Today we're making a wild lettuce soup. And so obviously we have the wild lettuce that we harvested earlier together. I also picked some mustard greens from the garden, as well as summer squash. And then we have some various carrots, purple and orange, a spring onion, as well as 2 different types of potatoes and a beet. Nothing really too strict here. I'm using whatever ingredients I have on hand. I also have cabbage or garlic. You know, if you're watching from home and you decide to follow along with this soup, it doesn't matter if you have bell peppers instead of carrots, or, you know, you can use whatever you have on hand. You can easily replace, for example, sweet potatoes with potatoes. I'm also going to add some sliced bacon into this creation. I've been eating way more meat the last couple years, and this comes from pork that was grown here locally. My wife and I bought a pig this last June. And so meat is of course going to be optional. People have different food beliefs, but for the sake of this tutorial and this video, I'm going to add bacon to this soup. Last but not least, I like having a little bit of carbohydrate in my diet. I'm pretty active. Check out my farm hands. I've been working really hard. It's nice to have a little carbohydrate in my diet for a little bit more energy. Soup can be one of those things that's very easy to make or a headache. And the difference, I think, is how good you are at delegating tasks. With soup, you can start cooking multiple things at one time and save yourself heaps of time, or you can space them out, do them individually, in which case making a soup will take twice as long. Can you guess which method I'm gonna show? So while the water's boiling, I'm also gonna work on my quinoa. I make a dish out of wild edibles called quinoa magic, which just basically means quinoa weeds and anything else. Maybe we'll make that on this channel next. In any case, how I cook it is 1 part quinoa and 2 parts water. That's 1 cup quinoa, 2 cups water. And I'm gonna turn it on the stove to bring it to a boil. And then I'm gonna put some butter in there and show you how I steam it to perfection so that it's delicious. We're gonna cover it, and then we're gonna make sure to watch it because 9 times out of 10, this thing spills over. At this point, I might as well start another task because I'm multitasking already. And so I'm gonna turn on this front one, heat it up for bacon. So this is small farm pasture raised bacon from a local farmer. And it's very thickly cut. It's not your average store-bought bacon. My wife and I are choosing to eat less meat products, but eat them from quality sources. So whether or not you choose to eat meat, that's on you. We're choosing when we do eat meat for it to be better quality. This is looking like it's starting to boil. So we turn this down to low. Multitasking away. These will be perfect fat chunks for a nice hearty wild lettuce soup. We'll save these 2 pieces later on for breakfast. Quinoa is almost boiled. At this point, it's safe to assume that it's warm enough to melt butter. And so I like to add a nice heaping tablespoon or 2 to the quinoa before it really starts boiling and steaming, because that makes it really buttery and creamy and helps it not stick together. And it'll just be more fluffy and pleasant to eat in your soup. You don't have to add butter. Again, if you're vegan, add a little bit of olive oil or avocado oil, coconut oil, but I like to add butter. I said it, I like to add butter. I was a vegan for 22 years, a raw food vegan for 18, and I've come full circle back around to eating meat and animal products. And a lot of people are gonna think that that's controversial. Oh, pause. Quinoa is bubbling. And so we're gonna turn it all the way down to low. Let out a little steam, make sure it's bubbling. And then we're gonna set a kitchen timer for 15 minutes for the quinoa to steam. Then we're gonna turn it off and let it steam for 15 more minutes. And then it's gonna be super fluffy and delicious. That's the best way I've found to cook quinoa. There are definitely gonna be folks that get offended seeing this, because for 22 years of my life I was a vegan, and 18 of those years I was a raw food vegan, and then years later I've come back around to eating meat, largely through foraging and hunting. I've realized that for my body this seems to work better, but a lot of people can't accept that, and so I'm just waiting for those hateful comments to roll in, and that's okay. You know, I'm not trying to offend anybody by eating bacon. This is simply the kind of soup that I would eat, the kind of soup that my wife would eat. And so I'm putting good free-range bacon in it. And if you want to try this soup but you don't want the bacon in your soup, all that I'm saying is you don't have to do it. You can make it totally vegan, put some tofu in it. I guarantee that it'll still be delicious. Now we're gonna start chopping vegetables in our soup in order of firmest to softest. So I have some potatoes here. I have 4 potatoes, 2 different types. And I like my summer soups Slightly more chunky, because oftentimes I'll eat them on the second or third day cold. And so if I leave things slightly bigger pieced, they kind of hold their shape better. They don't fall apart. Next, we'll do a little beet. That's also pretty hard. This will kind of turn the soup into a wild lettuce borscht, a Russian beet soup. I'm Russian by nature, but not in a hurry. I just sometimes make borscht out of every soup that I make. Luckily, borscht is delicious cold on a summer day. So if you don't like hot things when it's hot out, this soup is perfect for eating cold. No matter how hard I try, I always make enough to feed an army. I don't really even try anymore. Luckily, this soup keeps really well. You can eat it cold, and so making more than enough is kind of a good strategy, because then you can meal prep for yourself for days to come. It's probably time to start putting some seasoning in the soup. We're going to balance the 5 basic flavors today, like I do in most of my more complicated recipes. And this soup's turning out to be bigger than I thought, so we're going to start with about a teaspoon of salt. I hit it with some salt. Now I'm hitting it with pepper. Spice is nice. I follow the 5 basic flavors whenever I'm cooking, which just basically means that I get food to the consistency that I want it to be. Soup, salad, pate, you name it. And then I make sure that all of the 5 basic flavors are in there. That's 1 B and 4 S's. Bitter, sweet, sour, salty, and savory. I used to say spicy, but that was technically inaccurate. The spice receptor is not really like a taste bud on your tongue, it's a pain receptor, so spicy really isn't a flavor, it's a sensation. But still, the acronym holds true. 1 B and 4 S's. Bitter, sweet, sour, salty, and savory. If you balance all those flavors within your food, it's going to give you maximum pleasure when it enters your mouth, and people are just going to freak and fall in love with your creation. So that's the principle I'm working off today. And so I already put some salt, I put some pepper for the spicy or the savory, red chili flakes, and we're just going to start slow and keep it there. Let's do the carrots and the onion next. Then we'll do the squash, and then we'll top it off with the greens. And so I'm being pretty barbaric, pretty bold. If you want soup chunks that are smaller than this, by all means, improvise. The slower you cook this soup, the better it'll taste. So if you cook it all the way on low for like an hour, hour and a half, it'll be like Russian pho. Slow cooked, delicious soup. But if you don't have the time, you can kind of crank up the heat and boil it a little faster. But if I'm being perfectly honest, it doesn't quite taste the same. Slow is better. It's high time to put some more flavor into the soup. So we're just gonna start with maybe like half a spring onion. These things are so freaking sweet right now at the farmer's market. You can basically eat them like an apple. You can literally just sit here and go. There's a little onion, but it's like kind of like an apple. It's very sweet. $38, $36, $35, $34, $33, $32. So our quinoa is almost done with that low 15-minute heat cycle. When that timer goes off, I'm going to turn the quinoa completely off and set it to steam under the lid, meaning don't take off the lid, for 15 more minutes to reach that perfection that I keep talking about. It's summertime. The garden is starting to pump. And we're starting to get zucchinis galore. And so we're incorporating a lot more zucchinis into our diet lately. Next we'll do some cabbage, shred some cabbage. We're starting to get into the softer vegetables now. My mouth is watering just looking at them. I think I'm going to take them off the heat, and whatever little cooking they have left to do, they'll do in the soup once I throw them in there. This right here is something I think I've invented. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've never heard anybody else talk about this. Most people put their bacon on a paper towel, which then has to get thrown away or composted. I put my bacon on a tortilla, so it can still get that effect of drying off, being less greasy. But then all that grease goes into the tortilla, and you have some delicious tortillas you can eat later in a taco. That's looking pretty good. So far we have 4 potatoes, 2 carrots, half a zucchini, half a spring onion, and I think that's about it. So now I'm going to cover this with a lid. While that steams, the bacon rests, and the quinoa finishes cooking, I'm going to cut some garlic, cut some of my greens up, and get into position to finish off this soup. Put the final touches on it, if you will. Now I love this time of year. I love summer. I love farmers markets. And the potatoes that we got in the soup are super young potatoes. They will ruin you. If you've ever had young potatoes, you can't go back to just store-bought soft potatoes. You just can't. They're so much more delicious. They're almost like a completely different food. And the same is true of garlic. If you try fresh garlic, it's hard, it's mean, it's very fragrant, and it's a completely different story than the sad garlic you might buy in a multi-pack at Costco that's already pre-peeled and flavorless. This plays into the 5 basic flavors also. If you can build your food out of really high quality ingredients, there's absolutely positively no way that it's not going to taste better. You're using better building blocks, thus you're making better product. So in addition to the healthy weeds that we harvested, I think it's also really important to go to farmers markets, support local farmers, and more importantly, buy higher quality things that then we can build recipes out of. We'll chop up about 3 cloves of garlic. If you like garlic more, do more. And if you like garlic less, feel free to abstain entirely or just put less garlic in there. We're ready. It's time to put the bacon in the soup because we want those pork juices to fill our ingredients, make it even tastier. See what I mean? You got bacon greased tortillas for your next taco if you just abstain from using a paper towel. I cut up the meat, same way I cut up the vegetables, in nice thick juicy pieces. That's all fat. There are no words. There simply are no words. Quinoa has 35 seconds left, so we're gonna start mixing some quinoa in. Now is the point that I'm gonna start investigating the actual taste and flavor of the soup and balancing the 5 basic flavors. And so what that means is that I'm just gonna start sampling it a bunch and thinking about what I can add in there to make sure that it's most delicious. You know, the bitters, the sweets, the sours, the savories. Almost caught myself saying spicy again. That's gonna be a hard pattern to break. So right now it's pretty bland, which means it needs more salty for sure, more salt, more savory, more pepper. And so that's my first step, identifying what needs to be adjusted. Based on that finding, I'm gonna add quite a bit more salt, half a teaspoon of salt. I'm also gonna put some cumin in the soup. That's gonna contribute to the savoriness of it. Why not add a little bit more chili flakes and more pepper. Taste test number 2. Let's see what our adjustments just did. I'm tasting the vegetables. They're still not thoroughly cooked. I'm mostly concerned with the broth at this point. And see now, just in those few adjustments, it's exponentially better. It went from bland and boring to actually exciting the taste buds. And so we're actually pretty close. I like spicy food a lot. At every chance I get, I add more spice to my dishes. And so this is mustard from the garden, which is gonna pair really well, in my opinion, with this soup. And so I'm gonna cut that green up and throw it in the soup. This is now the time that our prickly lettuce goes in there. So just to kind of reiterate an earlier point made, if the lettuce itself has tenderness to it, if it's a young growing part of the plant, you can use the entire plant. So let me just illustrate my point. So these are the tips of prickly lettuce. And so I would just literally chop them up and put all of the tender bits, more tender bits, in the soup. And then as things start to become more fibrous and more thorny, I'd be a little bit more diligent about picking that stuff up. You can still use these more mature leaves in the soup, as the thorns will boil down. You know, we've been cooking this thing for almost an hour. It's gonna just boil everything down. But these stems, they end up being pretty firm as the lettuce grows. And so these are gonna take a lot longer to boil down. And then you repeat, repeat, repeat. So if you have more mature leaves you're trying to get at, you can literally just grab the top and slide your fingers down and create little bunches. And just like with asparagus, for the young tips, you just go until it snaps. And that's a good way to identify the more tender parts of this plant. I'm not at all concerned about the white milky sap. That's the good stuff in this lettuce. That's the stuff that cleans out your inner organs. By cooking prickly lettuce with bacon and other spices, we're severely going to decrease the amount of bitterness that we experience when we eat it. Look at how beautiful that's starting to look. I bet you could almost smell it. Leave a comment below if you would eat this soup. Show me your support, leave a like and a comment. Say, Sergei, I would eat this soup. Or Sergei, no, that looks disgusting. Either way, help me out, leave a comment. It's also time for our quinoa. This thing has now steamed for over 30 minutes. And so what we do with this stuff is we come in and add it to the soup. Maybe two heaping quinoa spoonfuls. Do you see how the quinoa kind of has curly little tails? Fun fact, your quinoa is fully cooked when those tails are unwrapped. So if you're not sure if you're cooking quinoa for the first time, or you're not that proficient, when the little curly cues unwind, that's how you know it's fully cooked. And see, watch what happens. As we mix this together, it just starts giving off the consistency of a really thick, hearty soup. You can see that the wild lettuce has already cooked down quite a bit. And it's starting to become way more appetizing. This is a Costco find. It's the original Japanese barbecue sauce, bachan. We call it banchan, but that's incorrect. It's bachan, I think. And, you know, the ingredients could be better, but we're also human, and sometimes we just put delicious things in our food because they're delicious. And because we acknowledge that we're all hypocritical in some aspects of our lives. I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about a friend I know. This is taste test number 3. With the quinoa, with the bachan sauce. Oh, yeah, that's good. Right there, that's delicious. That's even better than the second tasting. It's made the flavor three-dimensional. Really thinking about what flavors something is lacking and focusing on keeping it simple. Man, it works. Few people would not enjoy a bowl of this soup right now, I'm telling you. And you save some money because you used a weed that's really good for you, full of nutrition, and you went on a little adventure and it didn't cost you a thing. You went into your backyard or onto some public land and harvested some prickly lettuce and turned it into a very unique dish that you couldn't buy at a restaurant if you wanted to. So we went from a plant that tasted like a horse kicked me to something that's very pleasant that I'm gonna enjoy eating for lunch. So the very final step is to serve myself a bowl of it, make it look really appetizing, dish it up, you know, snap a picture for the YouTube image, and then it's lunchtime. We'll sign off. This is gonna be my lunch. This is what my wife is probably gonna eat for dinner. And so when I make this show, that's also one of my motivations, is to feed myself and my family and walk my own talk, so that it's not all just theoretical knowledge, it's also practical knowledge, and I get better as a person, as a forager from it. This is how much soup I have left over after my lunch. Half a gallon. This is easily 6, 7, maybe even 8 meals. And so my time spent making the soup is going to be very effective moving forward into next week, because a lot of our meals have already been cooked.